saw from the government a move this week to finally send it to committee. Now, that's an interesting point on a couple fronts. First, it would seem to be a concession that the backlash last time was significant, and so it's interesting to see the government make a move that seems to move it closer to where the opposition wanted it to be. On the other hand, they're leaving these committees, these 10 committees, precious time to actually review the budget. With a week break coming up in a few weeks, these committees are going to have maybe a couple days, maybe 2 or 3 days to kind of go through it. So that, again, puts the onus back on the opposition and to see if they can put up a big enough fight. So I think we're probably headed for another fight, and it'll be interesting to see sort of where that goes and what the kind of lasting impacts are and how many times the government can sort of go through one of these battles before they have to make really significant and lasting change to the way they do things.
What's happened in northern Mali is 3 Islamist groups, one of which is Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and the other 2 that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda, have taken over the northern 2/3 of the country. They're engaged in the normal repressive behavior, recruiting child soldiers, harshly punishing anyone that doesn't conform to their version of Sharia. And there is a bit of a movement for primarily intervention from Western African nations who would likely provide the bulk of any sort of ground force or military force. However, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was recently in Algeria trying to rally up support in that country, which will be crucial because it shares a long border with northern Mali. American and French, reportedly, drones are already in the area, and the United Nations has said it is ready to authorize an intervention. So I think the prospect of actual grunts on the ground from Canada, or indeed from any other Western nation, is low, but it's hard to see how Canada would not be asked, if this intervention takes place, to provide some sort of training or logistical support.
Probably not, but they showed some promising signs of MPs being able to talk to each other and talk to witnesses at the Canadian Heritage Committee this week, with some politeness and with some respect. It's a week that in the House of Commons was dominated a lot by foreign investment and an omnibus bill and navigable waters arguments about whether or not the government's going in the right direction on all those files. And none of those discussions were all that enlightening. Important issues for sure, but not exactly enlightening. Meanwhile, though, down the street in a committee room on Queen Street, the Canadian Heritage Committee was talking about video games with representatives of that industry from many corners of that industry, and in a change of pace. It was a pretty interesting discussion. It's a huge industry. It's the 3rd largest in the world, and Canada employs 16,000 people. And MPs seemed actually genuinely curious about what these people had to say about where that industry can go, how the government can help it, and how the government can also kind of get out of the way. And sitting there watching, it was refreshing, and it wasn't maybe the most controversial issue. It's maybe easier to talk about video games than it is to talk about omnibus legislation. But I'll give them credit for trying, and I'll give them credit for an interesting discussion.
Well, he's off to India right now, where he's expected to try to promote new trade and economic agreements, get them sort of jump-started and fast-tracked with India. But this all comes against the backdrop of growing anxiety over the Canada-China economic relationship. To me, this is puzzling. The PM has really done very little to try to explain and promote the new investment deal that they've negotiated with China, even though there are plenty of experts out there who say it's a good thing for Canadian business. At the same time, he's allowed a lot of confusion to reign over how they're going to handle questions of reviewing Chinese investment decisions in Canada. And this comes with the big Chinese state company's bid to buy Nexen, an Alberta oil company. It's funny that they didn't seem to have, the Conservatives didn't seem to have a better strategy for pushing this file as a good thing, given that the year started with the Prime Minister highlighting the need to do exactly this kind of trade and economic promotion in his landmark speech in Davos, Switzerland. So I think they started the year with ambitions in this area and seem to be ending it in a kind of confusion over what kind of messaging they want to push forward. Interesting to see if in the next few weeks they kind of get their act together and try to turn this from a file that they're kind of struggling on, barely treading water, to one that they can actually make some political hay with.